Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is sponsored by B. She wanted to do a shout out to the Big Sky Sanctuary, B&B. And that, it's located just outside of Melbourne, Australia. It's about an hour and a half outside. And they're just awesome. It's an awesome little sanctuary. They have a B&B. You can check them out at facebook.com/Big Sky Sanctuary B&B. We'll also put them in the show notes too. If I'm ever that close to Melbourne, I'll make sure to check them out.
You can sponsor an episode as well. All we ask for is at least $10. Go to whichsidepodcast.com and click on the donate tab. Donate at least $10 and we will be your shill. We will say whatever you want. Thanks so much, B.
whichsidepodcast.com. This is episode 117.
Yeah, we talk with Carolyn Zaikowski.
Yeah, she's an author. She's done amazing studies into the psychology of violence and, feminism. And I really loved our conversation. So stick around. Make sure you listen to that. What news and events are going on this week?
It's International Help Your Local Food Not Bombs Chapter Day week. And you need to go to your local Food Not Bombs chapter and help them out. If you don't have a local Food Not Bombs chapter, then start one up. Super easy to do.
Call out to start one up this week if you don't have one, or help them out. I love that. International Food Not Bombs Day. Week. Day. Whatever. Just help them, This week in the Slingshot Personal Organizer, February 4th, 1899, marked the start of the Philippine Rebellion against U.S. colonization. It's a really interesting history, by the way. People don't know much about it. And it includes the Rough Riders, interestingly enough. So look it up. It's pretty interesting. And fucked up at the same time. Hope you guys enjoy this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
So how's your day gone so far?
It's going well. I'm in Massachusetts and we're kind of getting ready for a blizzard, apparently. I found out this morning there was going to be a blizzard, so I spent most of the morning buying shovels, and that's pretty mundane and not exciting. I wish I had a more exciting story to tell you about my day.
Has your winter been a lot milder than you guys anticipated?
Good question. Things are so crazy with New England weather these days. I was out of the country for a couple weeks, and it was apparently well below freezing the whole time I was gone. Mm-hmm. But we haven't had a good blizzard yet. We just had a snowstorm this week, but we haven't had a proper New England blizzard yet this year. So apparently we're getting one on Tuesday, so I'll keep you updated.
I kind of wish we were having a blizzard. This has been the mildest winter here in Utah that I've ever remembered.
Really?
Only 2 snowfalls the entire winter so far.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm pretty much I don't know if I'm getting old or what, but I'm getting to the point where I'm I kind of get it. I get why people move to Florida. I get why old people do that. I'm kind of getting down on New England winter.
This is the first year that I've been I kind of wish it was colder and there was more snow. Usually I'm just fuck the snow. I hate this.
Wow.
So I don't know.
It's been really mild.
It's been really mild.
I don't mind though too much.
Well, I wish I could channel that. I wish I could just embrace the seasons and really own it, but I'm becoming a curmudgeon about this shit.
So you were out of the country. Where were you?
Interesting story. I was in Germany. I eloped. My boyfriend, now husband, and I eloped on January 1st and went to Germany.
Is it complicated to get married outside the States and then come back in and still get that validated inside the States?
Yeah, well, actually what we did was we didn't actually do the ceremony in Germany. I have heard that's very complicated. Mm-hmm. We went to my grandmother's house. She's almost 90 and she can't walk. She lives in like elderly housing. And we just showed up at her house on New Year's morning and said, you know, hey, Grandma, really love you. Knew that you wouldn't be able to come to a wedding. Can we get married in your living room right now? And we just got married in her living room and then hopped a plane to Germany and didn't tell anybody.
That's like the sweetest story I've heard in a very long time.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, it took some planning and it was really hard not to, because people knew that we were engaged. Mm-hmm. And my family does have a proud tradition of like elaborate elopements. And I think they knew that I would elope, but, yeah, I think it was the best way to do it. I really love my grandma. She is the only grandparent I've ever had, and there would have been like no point in having a wedding if she couldn't have been there. So yeah, it was really cool. She was really happy about it, and it went off without a hitch. And
that's awesome. Yeah. I love that story.
Thank you.
So what did you do in Germany?
We visited a town that my partner used to live in, and we kind of just went down to Munich and the Alps, saw a couple friends. I saw a German exchange student who I haven't seen since I was 16. And yeah, we tried to speak as much German as we could, and it was awesome. It was like being inside a little like Christmas snow globe. Like it was magical.
I took German for 3 years, and I think I only remember 2 phrases that I probably pronounced wrong.
Oh, what are the phrases that you remember?
Like, ich liebe dich.
Ich liebe dich.
Yes, see, there you go. And then, ich bin 16 Jahre alt.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because maybe you remember if you took German as a teenager that Dick, D-I-C-K, and Dich, D-I-C-H, mean 2 different things. And
yeah.
Dick means fat in Germany.
I just like saying it that way.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fun.
So, like, the first one is it's supposed to be like, I love you, right?
Yeah, ich liebe dich means I love you, but if you have awesomely bad pronunciation and you just say ich liebe dich, first of all, that's funny in English. But second of all,
it's funny in German.
I love fat in
German. It's kind of funny both ways. It works.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. German is like an absurd language. It's amazing.
I always feel really bad that I don't remember anything. Like, I can say I'm 16 and I love fat, apparently.
I know lines from the Earl King.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I forgot all of the German that I learned in high school, and then I had spent some time teaching overseas to some very disenfranchised populations who knew like 5 languages and 3 alphabets. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm going to learn German again. And I really just taught myself. I just went back to it and taught myself again. I was surprised by how easy it was to relearn a lot of it. So,
what did you use to teach yourself? Because I've been thinking about picking up Hindi.
Oh, okay. So there are these things you've probably heard of, like, what's it called? Like Rosetta Stone and stuff that are crazy expensive, but you can get them. I got a thing like Rosetta Stone at the library for free and just downloaded it all onto my computer.
Was it Pimsleur?
Pimsleur, yes.
Mm-hmm. That's the one the State Department uses, is that right? I'm
not sure. But it works. Like I learned conversational Thai using Pimsleur. Yeah, and you can get them for free at the library. And just like illegally downloading all kinds of German movies and stuff like that. So
I'm really ashamed that I never thought about going to the library for that.
I just stumbled across it. Don't be ashamed. I stumbled across it and I was very excited because I was like, this costs like $500 if you buy it.
Yeah.
And it's totally cool to take stuff from the library. It's not like I was stealing.
So what I know so far about you is that you know 3 goddamn languages.
Okay, well, I don't really. I should say that I don't really. I learned conversational Thai because I was in Thailand for 7 months. So, I mean, I would not say that I know how to speak Thai.
But you can get around if you need to.
Yeah, I was able to get around. I was able to say, you know, is this vegan? Like, does this have eggs in it? Like, things like that. And I don't remember any of it now. So, and the German is like a hobby. Like, I hope to be really good at it someday, but I'm definitely not fluent. I wish I was. I should lie. I should just lie and say that I know 3 languages.
Yeah, most people aren't going to question you on it.
Yeah.
So going back to that, what was it like being vegan in Thailand?
Actually, being vegan in Thailand was great because, I mean, as you probably know, in certain Buddhist traditions and in certain Buddhist countries, there's a long history of the monks and the monkhood having a very specific diet, and it's usually a vegan diet, and it also usually is a diet that's doesn't have spices in it and doesn't have alcohol. But if you go to a restaurant in Thailand, they'll know what you're talking about if you know the word for this diet. And the word is J, like basically pronounced Jeh, J. So if you go anywhere in Thailand and you say you want J, like you want J food, it's basically like saying you want vegan food.
Huh.
And they have so much respect for monks. Monks are such a part of society that everybody knows what that means. So it's actually really easy to be vegan and to actually get vegan food and not accidentally get non-vegan food in Thailand.
That sounds so close to like Jainism. I wonder if they are, related in any way.
Yeah, the word, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that. I don't know a lot about the history of Jainism or where the Jains came from. I do know some about the very complicated history of animal foods in Buddhist countries.
To my knowledge, it was an offshoot of Indian Buddhism.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's pretty much it. That's all I know.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think a lot of people in the quote-unquote West think that Buddhism is all about peace and all about vegetarianism, and it's actually not. It's very, very complicated belief system and practiced very differently depending on where you go in the world. So
I've always thought it was all about suffering.
That sort of is true. I mean, the 4 Noble Truths in Buddhism, are basically there is suffering.
Isn't the first one life is suffering?
Yeah, it's basically there is suffering. Uh-huh. Suffering exists, and that's a neutral statement. Like, it's not a value judgment. It's just like, this is just a reality. There's suffering, and now what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to relate to that? And how we relate to that is going to determine how happy we are and how happy the universe is.
That's how I used to tell if people actually really knew anything about Buddhism when I was in my early 20s. If you met somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I'm into Buddhism. Like, oh, are you suffering? And they gave you like a blank stare. You knew they knew nothing. And if they laughed, kind of like, haha, I get what you're saying, but you're kind of an ass. I knew that.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated by the idea of suffering in Buddhism because it's actually, maybe you know a bit about this, but that's really just one translation of the concept. Mm-hmm. It's not, like I've had a lot of Buddhist teachers give me other translations for the word they're talking about in the Pali is dukkha. So dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it's also can be translated as just like unsatisfactoriness. or like a general sense of like something just kind of is annoying or sucky. Like, oh, this Skype call is scratchy, Dukkha. You know, oh man, I just dropped water on my favorite sweatshirt, Dukkha. You know, it's not necessarily like babies are dying, war, suffering. It's just kind of this general sense of like, oh man, this sucks.
That's interesting because I haven't studied too much into Buddhism. I studied a lot more into Taoism, and it always seems to me that Taoism was more of life just is kind of an attitude, and that's kind of like what always drew me towards it.
Yeah, I don't know as much about Taoism or the Taoist texts, but yeah, that's what I've heard. I had an interesting shared interview with a writer who was really into Taoism, and he was asking me about Buddhism, and that was what he was saying. It was more just a basic flow. There's a flowiness, and you have to get into the flowiness of the stream and just go where it goes.
Yeah, it's a very, kind of, it is what it is. It's going to go where it goes. Just kind of accept it and everything's okay.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if this is the correct interpretation, but my sense is that Buddhism has that element as well, but it kind of ups the ante because there are these Buddhist ethics where it's like, okay, things are as they are. Learn how to, be the ocean and ride the waves, but also keep in mind that there is suffering and that like the ethical, there's an ethical imperative in Buddhism to help lessen suffering. And it's pretty explicit. Like, it's like, here's how you do that. Like, lessen suffering in yourself, lessen suffering in the world. Those two things are really intertwined. It's not just this like hippy-dippy, like, yeah, all right, it's cool, I'm just going to accept the fact that like nuclear bombs exist and factory farms exist. It's cool,
I one of the things that recently has drawn me to re-looking at or re-wanting to, because I really haven't done anything about it, into like Buddhism and Taoism, is the idea that you can be Buddhist or Taoist or like a lot of these other philosophies without actually believing in necessarily a god. So I've known of instances like where the Dalai Lama will call himself an atheist. It's a really interesting concept to me because, I going towards like the Judeo-Christian text, I would consider myself an atheist also.
Yeah, I think that's something that, the West, for lack of a better framing, or white people or Judeo-Christian culture can't really they don't seem to be able to wrap their mind around the idea of a religion that doesn't have a godhead. But yeah, that's my understanding of Buddhism and Taoism as well. Is it's not that there isn't a cosmology. Like, Buddhism has an incredibly intricate narrative cosmology with spirits and realms and like all this stuff, which is fascinating. But yeah, there's not a god. Like, I'm not an expert, but all of the Buddhist teachers I've come across, when confronted with that question, have said, yeah, there isn't a god. Like, it just doesn't work that way. You can be an atheist and practice Buddhism. So yeah, I definitely like that about it.
So do you consider yourself a Buddhist or just someone who likes studying Buddhism?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's funny, the word Buddhist is also like a kind of a Western idea. Like, Westerners just have to put ist and ism on everything. From what I know, it's not really conceived in Buddhist cultures. It's not necessarily conceived of as like, I am a Buddhist. It's more about, do you study the Dharma? Like, the word Dharma is used a lot. Are you a Dharma practitioner? Are you a practicer of the Buddhist tenets, So I would say that I practice Buddhism. And I would say that I'm really interested in studying the Dharma as Buddhists, or as Buddhist countries talk about it.
Do you feel that like the studying of that led you to veganism, or was it more like veganism led you to that, or they kind of just intersected independently of each other?
Well, I've been a vegetarian since I was 12 and a vegan since I was 15. So that was definitely before I knew anything about Buddhism. Mm-hmm. But I absolutely was drawn to Buddhism in part because it seemed to have room for a certain type of ethics that I haven't found in Western traditions. It definitely seemed to have room for something that I was looking for. There's room in Buddhist thought for talking about animals. There's room in Buddhist thought for talking about the ethics of food and explicitly the ethics of eating animals. That's not to say that all Buddhists are vegans or vegetarians, because that's definitely not true. But the conversation is there. And in the cosmology of Buddhism, animals play a role in a way that I don't see in Western traditions. I haven't personally seen it. I mean, I grew up an atheist. Like, my father was like born of Russian immigrant atheist parents. Mm-hmm. And so I don't actually know much about Christianity at all.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, for me, there's always been an intersection between Buddhism and some other Eastern thought systems and animal rights and veganism.
So what's your origin that brought you towards veganism at such a young age?
I met a pig named Oscar at I suppose as an adult I would call it a farm sanctuary. It wasn't called a farm sanctuary, this little place. It was actually an MSPCA. It was like it was an animal shelter that happened to have a little bit of farmland. Uh-huh. And they had, a couple cows, some horses, some goats, and a couple pigs who'd been rescued. As well as a cat and dog shelter. And I've always loved animals. Like most children love animals, and then they just have it completely beaten out of them. But,
sorry.
So I went to a summer camp at this animal shelter, and I was really drawn to the barn and this pig. And maybe if you've been around rescued farmed animals, they're very big. Pigs when they get to grow to be adults are so freaking big.
Oh, they're enormous.
Yeah, and they're majestic. They're amazing. They look you in the freaking eye.
Oh man, yeah, and they're big eyelashes.
Yeah, they have these huge, beautiful eyes, and they look at you, and it really, from my dumb human, standpoint, it's really hard not to come to the conclusion that I'm having some kind of eye contact, communication, spiritual connection. The pig probably wasn't thinking about it that way, but I mean, yeah, so this was my first contact with farmed animals, and I was really enamored of them. And simultaneously, I met this cool older girl. She was probably 15 at the camp, and she was really cool. It was when grunge was a thing, and she had really cool grunge outfits, and she listened to Nirvana and Letters to Cleo, and had a streak of pink in her permed hair.
Hope she listened to 7 Mary 3 too, because they were pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know. It might have been a little before that, if I'm thinking of the right band. But yeah, so I thought she was really cool. And like, she kind of took me under her wing, and she was a vegan. And we were eating lunch together one day, and I was eating a pepperoni, salami, and cheese sandwich. And she just looked at me and said, "You're eating Oscar." Oscar was the pig who I loved. And I looked at the sandwich, and I had that moment that I think a lot of vegetarians and vegans have had, where, you know, it's not actually that complicated. Like, you just, the curtain is opened and you make the connection that what you're eating is someone who loves their own life and would want to be safe and happy and alive if they had the choice. So I made that connection and was not really ever able to go back. And I actually wanted to be vegan immediately, but I was 12 and my parents were like, "What the hell?" Like, they were like, "Are you serious?" So, yeah, they kind of let me be a vegetarian, and they tried to work with it. And then when I was 15 or so, and I was starting to hang out at like hardcore shows, and I may or may not have met a couple ALF people, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I put my foot down, and I became vegan, and my parents just had to deal with it.
So what hardcore shows were you going to?
Some pretty awful ones. Yeah, I grew up in the Boston area, so I was going to these like real, 10-yard fight and slap shot and In My Eyes, and this real, it was actually a really bad experience being a part of that hardcore scene as a young woman.
I'm not too familiar with how the Boston scene was, but from my experience, for women in the hardcore scene, pretty much anywhere, it was a horrible experience. Yeah,
I can only look back on it in hindsight. I didn't realize it was a horrible experience at the time, because at the time I had no self-esteem, and these guys just all seemed so cool, But, yeah, it was really quite misogynist. And I actually am a musician, and I had male friends explicitly tell me, "We can't play music with you because you're a girl."
Really?
Yeah, it was a really, when you're in the throes of that kind of pummeling on your self-esteem, you don't realize it's happening. So it's only in hindsight that I see how insanely and accidentally misogynist that hardcore scene was. I hope that it's changed.
I kind of stopped going a long time ago, that being part of it, yeah.
Was that those bands too, or just the scene?
It seemed interconnected. I mean, the guys that I was friends with like worshipped these bands, and these bands certainly didn't seem at all interested in hanging out with girls as equals. I mean, I never saw a youth crew straight edge hardcore band with a girl in it. I was hit on by some of the band members. Many of them would ask me to hold their coats for them.
God.
But I mean, yeah, it's just a whole subculture where everything was reinforcing everything else.
I never really realized it until I remember Walls of Jericho was playing. And
oh, right.
And their very first song, somebody yelled "No clit in the pit," and Candace dropped the mic and said, "We're done," and they stopped the show.
Yeah.
And they were staying at our apartment that night, and we were talking to them, and like, it was when I first became aware of like how fucking bad it really was.
Yeah, it was bad, and I think one of the many reasons why it was bad is because when there's a subculture like that sort of prides itself on being leftist or having progressive to radical politics, and they know the language of radicalism, they know the language of lefty leftiness. Often, vegans, radical environmentalists, and Marxists and anarchists, and it's like that. The misogyny is that much more insidious because it's a lot of people who identify as already being radical. Like, they don't need to look at themselves. They've already mastered what it means to be radical, and it's that much more difficult to kind of find and really call out the misogyny. Like, it's really obvious when it's like bro culture at a dorm in like, some sorority and fraternity culture. It's like, real easy to be a radical or a lefty and point out that the misogyny and the rape culture there. But I've been thinking a lot lately about this, actually, these little rape subcultures and how imperative it is that radical and liberal people like step up and start calling each other out.
It's one of the things that I've been thinking a lot more about than I definitely used to, and partly because I have a daughter now, so now it's really rechecking back to myself and saying, where do these things come from? How do I better myself, and how do I make it the best for her? And it's almost shameful that that those type of things necessarily have to happen to re-question yourself and recheck yourself. But yeah, it's definitely important to do.
I just can't even imagine, having a daughter. What's that like for you as somebody who is socially conscious and like just wants the best world? That must be so hard to have a daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's what's really hard is that like I always have to question my motives. Am I just trying to be an overprotected father, or am I really looking out for the best for what's for her as being a strong woman? So I'm always, trying to double check where all my emotions are coming from.
Well, I think that's awesome.
It's hard.
I know, and that's why I'm not having kids. I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do it. I'll leave it to people who are a little stronger than me.
What's really hard for me right now is that she's 8, so she's older, and she's really coming into her own, and wanting her to be able to find herself and express herself is not necessarily the same as like the ideal person that I would want her to be, if that makes sense. And so
totally.
She's a lot more into the traditional, effeminate things, but now it's making sure that she's proud of those things and realizes that she's not limited to those things.
Yeah, just making sure that she has options and that she's empowered, and yeah, that's tough. So is your daughter vegan?
She is, yeah.
Cool.
From conception. And now she's 8. I know people say it's young, but it really is her choice now. So
I believe it. If I'd have known about these things when I was 8, I would have fought to be vegan. I really believe that. Save the 1 or 2% of the population that is a diagnosable sociopath. I really believe that everyone has an inner vegan, that, everybody has the inclination to not, people don't want animals to suffer. And the psychological gymnastics routine that people have to do in order to partake in systems of animal oppression is like one of the most profound, like deeply entrenched, dark things that humanity has ever done. Like what we have to destroy in ourselves repeatedly in order to be awful to animals is really profound. I really think that we're all just vegans waiting to become ourselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah. So how do we convince people to connect with that inner vegan?
Yeah, that's the big $1 million question, I guess. I've found a lot of what I'm about to say is really biased because she's a dear friend, but I find the work of Melanie Joy to be incredibly important and empowering. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Melanie Joy's work, but
I'm not.
She is a psychologist who studies the psychology of meat eating and the psychology of harm. You know, how is it that we can harm others and harm animals, but still maintain a self-concept of ourselves as being peaceful, good people? Like, how does that work? And I really recommend her book. It's called Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. And it's about, you know, it's about that psychological gymnastics routine, like the different types of defense mechanisms that people engage in when they're partaking in an act of violence and they want to maintain their positive self-concept. And maybe if we understood that a bit more, like the process of like, how do good people do bad things, basically, maybe if we understood that a little bit more, we could start, we could figure out better ways to advocate.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it, like trying to isolate where that comes from.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that Melanie Joy's work, a lot of it, she talks a lot about the famous psychiatrist Robert Lifton, who is famous in part for having studied the Nazi doctors. Mm-hmm. He's got this amazing book called The Nazi Doctors. And in it, he interviewed these Nazi doctors, and they were not sociopaths. Like, they were not, you know, to put it colloquially, bad people. Like, they thought of themselves as good people. They were empathetic. They went home at night after doing these crazy things, these crazy experiments on humans. And they went home at night and had like normal interactions with their families, and they had families they loved. And like, they wouldn't be diagnosed as sociopaths, as like as non-empathetic people. And so Robert Lifton like wanted to know, like, what the hell is up with that? Like, how is it that people can basically be good people and do horrible things? And he came up with a concept that he called psychic numbing, which is basically a whole set of psychological mechanisms that people use to, you know, ward off cognitive dissonance. You know, anything from like denial, simple things like denial, to dissociation during the act of doing something bad, you know. Applying this to meat eating, people dissociate. They don't connect with the information that it's an animal. They're literally dissociating from reality. Other elements of psychic numbing could include, you know, creating binaries. So like, well, that's a good group of people. My family are the good group of people I protect. The Jews are the bad people. So creating these false binaries. The dogs are the good animals who we don't eat. The pigs are the, you know, they're pigs. We can eat them. You know, and a whole range of other basically psychological defense mechanisms that we use to just get away from the reality and to maintain a positive self-concept.
It kind of reminds you of like vivisection doctors that, you know, they'll test on dogs and cats, and then at their home they have dogs and cats as animal companions. It's like,
absolutely. There are psychiatrists, actually, radical psychologists who've studied vivisectionists. There are a couple really interesting studies of vivisectionists in which the concept, Robert Lifton's concept of psychic numbing, was applied to vivisectionists. Yeah, so that's like a whole world if anybody is interested in digging into like basically the psychology of violence and like what is it that, why are people violent? That's like a whole realm of study that I think is.
Have they come to any conclusions on how to try to break down those walls that people are creating? Yeah, well, I think people are applying the idea of psychic numbing in a lot of different fields. I know people have used psychic numbing to try to understand like nuclear mentality, like how are we okay with living in a world where nuclear bombs exist? People have applied it to racism. I can speak a little bit to Melanie Joy's work and how she's applied it to what she calls carnism, or the ideology that makes us believe that it's okay to oppress some animals. And I know that she would say that the antidote is compassionate witnessing. And basically, you know, asking people to witness themselves, so like to witness their own resistance, to be compassionate to their own, you know, their own resistance, to witness the system, to witness the fact that this is actually, we are also like victims of this system. Like we've been brainwashed to believe that this is right, that, you know, carnism and eating animals and, you know, destroying animals, that this is okay. Like this is something we've been the victims of brainwashing. Like it takes a lot to, you know, we have to do this to children from the womb pretty much to convince people to treat animals this way. So I think the antidote is a number of levels of witnessing. Like, yeah, so like witnessing one's own dissonance, witnessing the fact that we're also victims of this system, and witnessing others as they suffer and really touching others' suffering. And like I said, with that moment with the salami and the pig, just this very simple moment of like lifting the veil. I wonder if that's where like the Toronto Pig Save gets their idea of witnessing the slaughterhouses.
I'm not so familiar with that. What is that about?
So what they basically do is that they bear witness to the animals being slaughtered. So they force themselves to be present wherever they can. So that whether that's right outside the slaughterhouse, whether that's along the routes that the truck drivers drive.
Oh, I've seen videos of that with on the trucks where they're giving the animals water.
Yeah, that's them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I just never knew where that where you talked to the founder of Toronto Pig Save about it, but the whole root of it never really came up, and I was just wondering if that was it.
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm fascinated by trauma studies and the study of violence, and it seems to come up again and again, the idea that to heal from violence, one has to witness violence, and one has to witness suffering. So that can take on so many layers. It can be, one is, a rape survivor, for example, needing to witness and be compassionate to themselves and needing other people to witness them. It could be witnessing a violent system, which, the system and the individuals within the system, which is like, witnessing those trucks on the way to slaughter. And then this other level of creating a witness as a document, videotaping it, so inviting whoever sees the video to be a witness. That does seem to come up again and again at least amongst psychologists when they study violence and how to heal from violence and how to create nonviolent systems. This imperative to witness at all these levels.
What draws you towards the study of violence? Like what is like your motivator for that?
Interesting question. I'm not sure. If I was going to be kind of self-disparaging, I suppose I could say I've always been a little bit obsessed with morbid things and death.
Okay.
But if I'm going to give myself a little more credit, I've always been really interested in psychology, and I studied psychology and I studied the psychology of violence and trauma as an undergrad at UMass Boston, and I met Melanie Joy there. And she became a mentor and later a dear friend. And Melanie studies the psychology of trauma, the psychology of violence, and the psychology of nonviolence. And so I met her during a time when I was actually working on a rape crisis hotline. Mm-hmm. And so I became, all these things were making me really fascinated and, you know, yeah, just the psychology of it. And I went, you know, I guess it did a little bit become an obsession because I went on to grad school. I studied writing in grad school and it came back. I ended up writing my thesis on the psychology of language and trauma, and narrative, and traumatized narratives and the role that language and narrative play in violence and in healing from violence. So I don't know what it is. Yeah, I do have a little bit of an obsession with it.
Going in a different direction, did you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, speaking of violence and narrative, so I have one book published. It's a novel, and I've got another coming out in 2016, but this novel is called A Child is Being Killed. It was published by Aqueous Books in 2013. And this novel actually came out of my studies of narrative and trauma. And something that I came to be fascinated by that I can only think to call a traumatized text, or like a shattered text, like a shattered story that someone is telling, either in the midst of a trauma or after it. And, you know, this question of like, what does it mean to tell a story when all of your symbol systems and all of your sign systems that make up your reality have been shattered, which is what trauma is. And so what does it mean to tell a story given trauma? So this book came out of my obsession with that. And actually the title, A Child is Being Killed, comes from the philosopher Maurice Blanchot, who studied all this. And he wrote a book called The Writing of the Disaster, in which he challenged his reader. He said, what does it mean to say a child is being killed? Like, does it mean anything? Like, can you actually represent such a horrifying, unspeakable thing in language? And is it a betrayal of the thing to try to represent the thing? And like all these really thorny questions about what it means to represent the unspeakable, to try and speak the unspeakable. So my novel partly came out of that. And it partly came out of my work in the field of rape crisis and rape crisis intervention, and work that I had done in with women and children in the red light districts in Calcutta, India, who had been trafficked. This is all a long-winded way to say that my book is about sex trafficking, and it's a story about trafficking. And it's the culmination of this web of things, and just attempting to tell an unspeakable story. So,
well, sex trafficking is one of those things that I know happens, but I know next to nothing about. It's unspeakable. I mean, there are more slaves in the world today than there ever have been in all of human history. So that's kind of an amazing statistic, an amazing fact. So how does that happen? And have people like myself that would consider myself pretty socially aware, not really like aware of the deepness and the level of atrocities that are happening?
Yeah. it's an amazing thing. A lot of people don't know that much about sex trafficking, and I got a little mini theory that could have to do with the fact that it's so unspeakable, like that it is so effed up that people don't even know how to go about knowing about it. But yeah, there are people who are trafficked into, sweatshops, for example, like, what we would call quote unquote regular slaves. And there are people who are trafficked into, the sex trade. And it does get a little dicey because there are also legitimate sex workers who weren't trafficked.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conversation to be had there. But yeah, I would definitely encourage people to, especially, I know a lot of vegans who talk a lot about like the language of abolitionism, and often invoking the idea of slavery. I would encourage those vegans to learn about the history of human slavery a bit more and the present situation of human slavery. I think there's a lot of interesting overlap there that's actually not being done the justice it should be given.
Where would you suggest one would start on like the present day state of human slavery?
Good question. I would, I can give you, the resource that first comes to mind is the organization that I worked with when I was in India, which is called Shanlap. That's spelled SAANLAP, Shanlap. And they are a pretty well-respected international anti-sex trafficking organization, and they have a lot of resources if a person wants to go to their website. The other reason I trust this organization is that they were started by the people. Like, sometimes you find these like international NGOs and it's kind of just like white people do-gooders going to, save the brown people kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Shanlap was actually started by an Indian woman who went into the red light districts and said, I have money. I'm a philanthropist. Tell me how I can help you. And the sex workers said to her, help our kids, help our unions, help what we're already doing. And so it's funded by, it was originally funded by an Indian philanthropist, but all of their policies and programs have been guided by the actual sex workers who live there. So they're kind of neat in that way. So I'd say check them out as a start.
And you worked for them? Did you work for them in India?
Yeah, I volunteered for them for about 2 months in the summer of 2004 in Calcutta, India. So it was a while ago at this point. But they're a pretty neat organization, so check them out.
How do you feel? Because I've been looking at India a lot lately as far as like their progression, their social progression. How do you feel like their social progression has happened towards the views of women in the last, like, say, like 10 years, especially with the new change of like their prime minister and some of the things that he's come out with?
Yeah, that's a good question. India has 1 billion people. So my sense has always been that it's really, really hard to say any one thing about it. And I asked an Indian woman basically that same question once, because I was having trouble wrapping my mind around it all. And she used the following example. She said, I went to the passport office to get my passport renewed, and there were a group of women there who couldn't write, and they were peasants. They were somehow trying to escape, and they were peasants, and they couldn't write, so they had to sign their form with a thumbprint. And then she said she got on the plane to take her trip, and all of the pilots were women. And I think that's just an illustration of like the vastness of all the different situations that people could find themselves in when you live in a place that has 1 billion people. So It's hard to say. It is a fascinating and complicated country, and I've had a hard time wrapping my mind around gender and politics. But there's an actually really great writer, Chandra Mohanty, who has written some really great post-colonial feminist analysis of that part of the world, who people might want to check out.
I have a friend who lives in Pune, and he just barely had a little girl, and him and his wife, when they had the little girl, decided that they want to now move outside of India just because they had a girl.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's what really made me start thinking about it in different ways.
I mean, class in India is really profound. Like, there are these, my experience was that there are these profound class differences, like such profound poverty, which is what people in the West think a lot about when they think of India, but profound wealth. And there is some amazing, profound wealth in India. The
divide is so stark.
Yeah, and so that's something to think about too. I mean, I don't know. It would really depend on a person's economic situation. But I always like to remind myself about how much it can suck in the United States to be a woman when I think about these things.
Yeah.
I like to keep myself in check on that, because there are some pretty amazingly awful things that happen to women here that don't happen in places that we consider third world. So
what do we do to fix that?
Go vegan. Man, I don't know. I mean, what is to be done?
What can I do as a middle-class privileged white male to help with that?
Man, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, I ask myself that all the time. I don't, maybe one of the most important things to do is to just keep asking the question. Maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe the humility of asking the question and of saying just, wow, this is awful. And just saying, I don't know, and having compassion and being a witness. And I don't know. I think admitting that there isn't a simple solution might be one of the things people have to do. And I know maybe that's a downer thing to say. But I don't know. I mean, people just need to be nice to each other. People need to be critical thinkers, and they need to be nice to each other.
What's hard for me as an activist, you want to create action, but with this issue, it's one of the few things that I know I have to always take a second seat to. You can't go in there and be like, well, I'm going to do this because I don't know. Yeah.
And I mean, myself, thinking about action, and I've had to continually reevaluate what I think activism in action even is. Because experience has shown me that sometimes the most effective action is actually to be fucking quiet and to let other people talk, to do very simple things. I've come to realize, for example, that the most effective vegan action I can take is literally to make people vegan cupcakes. Mm-hmm. And this is not sexy. It's not a big statement. I'm not wearing a back patch that talks about I'm not wearing slogans. I'm not doing anything illegal, and that's all valid too. But I can actually say at this point, I think that I have raised more consciousness about veganism through making vegan cupcakes than I have through practically any other actions I've done. And so for me, I've really had to reevaluate what the idea of activism in action, period, and what it means. And the idea of what does it mean to put oneself out there? And is there gender stuff with that too? Do I always need to speak my mind, or is that a really masculinist conception? Maybe I should just let other people talk, instead of always feeling I need to be the one that says something. this just is some of the stuff that I've been thinking about over the past couple of years as I try to navigate the what the hell do we do question.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that, like you mentioned the making the cupcakes, and for me, it's just living a normal life, like just living a normal fucking life and showing, that you have a normal life being, this vegan anarchist family, that it raises so much awareness that, it's not just extreme radicalism.
Mm-hmm. Or like maybe that is the radical thing to do. Like, I don't know. Maybe just being nice. Like maybe that's really what it is. Like maybe we just need to like shut the hell up and be nice.
But whenever somebody says that, I want to yell, but that's just hippie bullshit.
Yeah, it might be. But
I don't know.
I think I don't know that I mean it in the same way that hippies mean it. I think I know what you mean. Yeah. No, I mean it in like this whole other way of just like having humility. Mm-hmm. Like having humility, knowing how to speak skillfully, like always remembering that I don't know everything, and like actually making a genuine effort to get along with people who I know do not agree with me, and I do not agree with them. Like actually making an effort to have connections that go beyond politics or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, I definitely don't want to go down the like apolitical hippie niceness road. I don't mean to do that. But there is something about just being humane. Like maybe that's another word for it. Like just being humane to people. Like, and that doesn't have to mean just being nice. It can mean, a whole lot of things, being humane. It could mean opening up a cage and doing an illegal action. Like that could be being nice. That could be being humane, I don't know. I wish I had the answer.
Well, is there anything that we haven't gotten around to talking about that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I don't know. This is all just stuff I feel like I could talk about forever. Do you have anything that you feel like a burning desire to mention?
I always want advice on being a good parent. But that's just me. But
I don't have kids, but, like everyone else who doesn't have kids, I like to get on a high horse about how people should parent.
Okay, so how should people parent?
Yeah, I guess I'm being a little facetious, but I do have a little nephew and now a niece since I just got married. A little niece. I mean, I don't know. This is why I'm not having kids, because I'm like, I don't know how the fuck people do this.
Trust me, every parent doesn't know either.
Like, I'd want to put him in a crate instead of letting him run around, and that's
I mean, yeah, I've been a nanny, and I know that as a nanny, I was like so nervous that the kid was going to choke or fall or like these really basic survival things that I was just like, I don't know how parents deal with this. Talk about psychic numbing, like having to dissociate like every time your kid is even near the stairs or like anything they could fall on.
At least for me, you learn pretty quickly they're very fucking resilient.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they might fall down the stairs, but they're probably not going to die.
Their bones don't break as easily.
Yeah, they don't break quite as easily.
They're closer to the ground.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, how do people parent? I'm in awe of parents. I'm just in awe of parents.
Trust me, there's nothing to be in awe of. Every parent is just faking it all the time.
So I'd say most people don't parent.
Most people don't parent.
Very well.
Yeah, that seems to be true.
He's looking at me and glaring as he says that, like.
Well, what would you say if someone was just going to have a kid and they were scared? What advice would you give them?
Relax. Like really, like it's not that hard so far, and and just let them be them. You know, kind of like you don't get mad at the little things because, you know, just cherish them while you can.
Wow. I wish I could tell myself that. Like, if I were my own parent, like, just relax, be yourself. It's all good.
You know, one of the things my wife does is, like, whenever she wants to get upset about anything, she's got in the habit of taking a picture of the situation. And
like a literal photograph?
Like a literal photograph, no matter what the situation is. So, like, if there's a meltdown or something bad's happening, or even if it's something as benign as, you know, they take a magic marker to all your walls. Take a picture of it. Look at the picture before you react. And it really seems to mellow every situation out.
I like that. So, like, trying to develop, like, responsiveness instead of reactivity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's very Buddhist. And probably Taoist.
She would argue neither. She would just, but
yeah.
Yeah. Which kind of makes it those at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, things come out of everywhere. Things come from so many different places, but yeah.
But I mean, I got to give her all the credit. I couldn't do any of it without her. Which is true. So. But
she'd probably say the same about you, I'm sure.
Probably not.
No?
Probably not.
I don't need him. That's funny.
But how can people follow you and get in contact with you and, you know, see your work?
Well, I have a blog, and you could find that, and there's more information about me there, and that's liferoar.wordpress.com. So life and roar, like lion roar. So LIFEROAR at wordpress.com. And I like to call that blog a safe space for anarchist apes. And that's my little shout out to all the creatures and all the necessary liberation. So there's that. And if you want to buy my book, it's called A Child is Being Killed. And you could Google that, or it's on Amazon. It's at Aqueous Books. It's at Ingram Distribution. So there are a number of ways. I would always say is to support the publisher and not buy it at Amazon. But, you know, we do what we can.
Well, we end every episode saying fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Yeah, I'm from Boston. I love swearing. Okay. Fuck, shit, damn.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Okay, have a wonderful weekend.
Bud.
Bye.
Bye. This week you heard
The Creeper by Pelican.
Right now you're listening to
Awaken the Kraken by Serpent Cult.
I'm going to sound like a broken record. But iTunes, rate and review us. Do it. Grab someone's phone. Do it. It's that simple. Period.
Exclamation.
Exclamation point. Side down exclamation point. Regular side exclamation point. I like doing it.
Ellipsis. M dash. N dash.
Mm-hmm.
And such.
Yes. All of those. Just please. We're begging now. Just rate and review us.
That's all I'm going to say. No need to...
No need to what?
To continue. Our listeners have no soul.
But we do have social media also. So, you know, follow us there.
Yeah. We often talk about things that we don't talk about on the show. So follow us. Go to whichsidepodcast.com. Click on the social tab.
Fuck shit damn.
Fuck shit damn.
We need a social media intern to join our team. If interested in becoming activist famous or a level 5 vegan, hit us up on social media. Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.